What's up, guys? Welcome back. We haven't done this in a while, but this is a collection breakdown for this summer collection, which I believe is collection 17. Yeah, I think we'll kind of start with the basics, or not so basic, but I think as a company that's really trying to prioritize uniforms, like I think you kind of have to start with things that are reliable. We'll start with kind of like the template, the foundation of all of our t-shirts. This season we are launching line 1, which is basically our blanks line. So here we have a boxy t-shirt with raw seams, exposed serging on the outside. Got some details with the side seam brought over to the front, and this asymmetrical shoulder seam as well. And then our classic notch on the collar. This is a classic. If you have any of our t-shirts, this is basically the foundation of that. And then on the back, one thing we're trying to do is kind of have a universal branding system. So here we have this like white woven label, which is ultimately a line that is pulled from the line on top of our logo. And you start to see this like motif, and I think over time we kind of just want to have, I guess, something that's a bit more subtle. We never really put branding on stuff, but a lot of our stuff also doesn't have branding, so we're thinking of ways to, more or less brand the pieces. So another hit this season is our Henleys. So our twisted Henleys with our asymmetrical raglan. Anyone that has pieces from, I would say even like earlier collections, you'll see this kind of sleeve design made out of a medium weight waffle, serging, again slip collar, and then these buttons, 3 buttons, and then similarly we have our label at the back. Sorry, not the back, at the front. And then something exciting that we're doing this season, or at least that we're bringing back, is our dyed collection. So inspired by this, I would say more or less like tie-dye technique from Ghana, we kind of want to think of how we can make blanks interesting. Really using this kind of like dyed situation. I think it just kind of makes the pieces a bit more interesting and adds a bit more character, opposed to kind of like this kind of like unification of like blank pieces that we see obviously coming up from like any brand, from like designer brands to high street. So looking at this kind of POV, this cultural POV, and how that informs color. So using like a veg dye, and you kind of get this like really beautiful patina, and then we remove the pocket, the kangaroo pocket, and then we kind of reconstructed an invisible side zipper pocket, so you still have that functionality. And then again, we have our asymmetrical raglan. This is a bit more of a standard hoodie, so for anyone that has any of our hoodies, usually they fit a bit more like boxier and they're big. This is, I would say, just a bit more kind of fitted. So just think about like a standard hoodie. 2-way zippers. Yeah, one of my favorite pieces. It's a sample, but we're gonna have the tag in the hood, again, just for that kind of like familiarity and this branding system that we think about. So this is really something that we're looking forward to. And I think going forward, we're gonna try to continue to, tell this like dyed story and have like different colors, especially seasonally, and kind of make a moment around them. So here we have our sculpted lounge pants with button closure and this kind of warped seam with darting at the knees, kind of creates this like really nice shape. At the back, we have a yoke that kind of comes from this, I guess, denim pants with a slip pocket with the button kind of detailing that you kind of see in the front for continuity. And then at the side of the pant, from the back wrapping to the front, we have the white label. I actually have those pants on right now. Next, we have a tank top. We've made a lot of tank tops in the past. One thing that we've done with a lot of our tank tops is we have an asymmetrical armhole, just kind of create a bunch of interests. So we carry that through with this design, and then we have our signature notch. One thing that's really cool is on the front of this, we have a laser cut motif of a tank top. We just kind of laser cut that shape on top of this. So you have some perforation, some breathability, but also a really great piece for layering. Obviously, especially whatever color you're wearing, you start to see pieces of that come forward. This is probably one of my favorite pieces from the sports collection. Here we have a nylon track jacket. This is a piece that we've been kind of building on from season to season. This season we want to have a bit more color blocking, so the asymmetrical sleeve is a bit more visible. Just kind of a lot more color blocking, obviously. But yeah, lightweight nylon, mesh lining, two-way zipper, rib to match whatever color the nylon, I guess, meets at rib. Yeah, really beautiful piece. And then two main pockets in the front, little back tab. This is like probably, like I said, one of my favorite pieces, but yeah. Back by popular demand, our football jersey. I think we made this jersey during, was it 2021, 2022? So yeah, this is a football jersey that we've done over the years in different fabrics. We did the first couple, the first one was it was upcycled using like real jerseys, and then we started to like produce them in like a cotton with kind of like a wash and a fade. And then this season we kind of brought back that language, but we wanted to make something that like, I guess, felt like an actual kind of jersey, like something you would kind of find in like in a sports shop. So yeah, you have the applique of the numbers, screen print, and then piping, and then you kind of have this like two-tone fabrication. So you have a mesh, and then you kind of have like a more or less like a poly fabric. So yeah, for me, like a really strong piece. You kind of have this the line that wraps around to the back, and then this kind of has built-in shoulder pads, so it does give a bit more of like an exaggerated look. But one great thing about this style that we haven't done in the past is that the shoulder pad is removable. So if you kind of want to have a bit more of an exaggerated look, you can have that with the shoulders. And if obviously you just kind of want to have something that feels like a bit more like everyday, you can remove the shoulder pads. So again, really, really great piece. I feel like I'll get a lot of wear out of it. For our seasonal collection this season, we want to bring back the camo. So we launched camo in collection 16, I guess last fall. And we had it in like a snow color. This season we want to bring it back in kind of like a light safari kind of silhouette. So here we have, again, similar shape to the track jacket, but obviously a bit more, I guess, elongated or exaggerated in terms of length, with a bit more of a straight cuff, but we have these tabs to kind of create some like cinching. So you have like a tab, and then you can obviously change the length of the cuff. Following that, we have two cargo pockets in the front, zipper down the front, two-way zipper down the front, and then placket with, again, similar asymmetrical armhole in this kind of like more traditional color or traditional camo color. So we have that, and that's produced with the shorts. So similar to the sweatpants, this is more or less like a shorter version of the sweatpant. So where we have the knee dart, we end these pants, and it kind of, you still get that kind of like sculpted look, wrapping around, and then that kind of seam wraps into a cargo pocket at the front with a bit of fullness on the, I guess, on the side and the bottom, not where the seam is. So you have that. Zipper closure, front pocket, and then back pocket with button closure as well. And one side of the pocket feeds into the seam. So yeah, really interesting. Honestly, I love this. I love the length more than anything. I like to wear things that kind of go past the knees, so here you have it. And then we brought in this new motif. So it's a star. I think everyone knows that I'm from Ghana, and the Ghana flag has a star, and that is obviously something that is like a symbol of the country. But I think there is something that is universal about the star, and obviously I have my own connection to the star, but I was thinking about how I can use an icon as universal as the star and more or less like make my own star. So we basically sketched around like more or less like different ways to incorporate the name into the star, and like this is more or less like what I landed on. So yeah, we have this brown and black hoodie, obviously pulling the colors from the camouflage, a bit of like distressing on the hood and the sleeve, and then this kind of like raw seam detail, similar kind of seam detail that we have on our t-shirt. The notch that was on the collar is now at the bottom here, and then we kind of have the applique. So yeah, it's like, this is like a classic, you can't go wrong with this. But in some classics, we have our denim jacket. This is a carryover from the previous season. We've been doing this jacket for like years. This is the first time we've done it in this like colorway, but this is more or less like our spin on a classic denim trucker jacket with, it looks like buttons, but they're actually snaps. So really convenient, but obviously you still get that look of a button thing, and then this kind of rounded shoulder, kind of more or less like drop shoulder situation. And then we have our straight leg, like more or less like double knee carpenter jeans. You'll start to see a lot of like familiar details within the pieces. So obviously here the notch is on the waistband, so you have a pocket there, pocket here, and then we have the back with a more or less like a light wash, but then we remove the pocket to kind of leave the shadow of the pocket that was there before. Then you have one pocket on the side, and then actually we're looking at how the yoke would more or less traditionally be a seam, but now it's functional. So here we have our golf shirts, twisted golf shirts, again, a classic of the brand. We've done in different materials, different colors. This season we wanted to do in something that was like solid, so we have a red and a black. Honestly, it's so funny. I feel like a lot of the graphics this season was kind of pulled from some of the things I was seeing in my travels, and I basically like worked with my graphic designer to kind of, I guess, more or less like reinterpret those things. Obviously, if you know, you know, but I won't say. But so you kind of have this like twisted detail, twisted more or less like on the body. As you wear it, it kind of pulls and kind of drapes in an interesting way. And then we kind of want to follow that pulling with the collar. So the collar obviously pulls in one direction, and then similar to the Henley, you kind of have these like 3 buttons details. And then plain on the back with our label at the back of the neck. Again, it's like the more I feel like you look at these pieces all more or less like beside each other and next to each other, you kind of see like a continuation of a design language. So yeah, it's very kind of like interesting. Sometimes obviously I don't really notice, but as I kind of talk about it, the more I talk about it, you start to realize like, oh shit, a lot of this stuff is just kind of like an ongoing like conversation, if you will. So one of the things that the brand, I would say, has been known for in the past couple of years, and something that we're really trying to build on, is this like idea of knitwear. There's a certain sense of like duality that you can get with like a knit. You know, it can be something that feels very casual, or also something that feels very kind of like formal or polished. So that kind of lands us like with this piece. I would say this is kind of like the inception of like our I guess knit journey. So this was actually maybe the second knit style that we ever did for the brand. The first knit style that we did was kind of like a bit more of like it was like a sweater and a vest. And then I kind of wanted to think of something that really more or less like was a representation of the brand's, everything that the brand is trying to more or less like say, and the POV of the brand. We landed on this like polo shirt or tie shirt with this like tie motif. And obviously, I think if you haven't seen this, I don't know like where you're living, but obviously like I feel like the world has seen this piece, and obviously I feel like it's also inspired other things. But this was kind of like the inception of where I think our knit journey started. And obviously for me now, this is kind of like a staple and something that I feel like will always be available and part of the brand. So obviously you kind of have these 2 invisible zipper details. And yeah, just made out of like a 100% wool with more or less like button cuff opening. And then the following season, we made these scattered button cardigans. I personally am not a fan of a V-neck cardigan. I love like a crew neck, so we kind of want to, again, bring that design language into this kind of like ongoing conversation of knitwear. So here we have this crew neck cardigan. Again, our signature notch at the collar. And then again, like wanted to create something that felt subtle but also had like an interesting point of view, and really kind of like deconstructing these like wardrobe staples, but instead of adding like instead of adding new things, like looking at what already exists and playing within that. So obviously with this we kind of added a bunch of buttons, and beyond like the visual aspect of it, it's also functional, so you can kind of like style it in interesting ways. And then for this season, we want to look at how we can continue that story. And obviously we have the camouflage. I think this season we're looking at a lot of patterns. So we have like the tie-dye, the camouflage, and the Argyle. Again, we're looking at the Argyle, and I think again looking at it through this lens of like deconstruction and trying to think of how we could more or less like make something new without like doing too much. And that's where we kind of start to like introduce these like sheer panels. This was like very difficult, and I think that was something that was like hard to produce. A lot of factories that we were more or less like working with weren't able to, but obviously we were able to find someone that could bring this to life. But again, it's the same shape, same silhouette, same button details, but then incorporating the pattern of the Argyle, and I guess without making it feel like something that like your grandpa would wear. We kind of want to add this like sheerness that adds like a certain level of like, I guess like risk and sexiness to it, depending on how you want to wear it. Also just like a great layering piece. So obviously you don't have to wear anything under it, but then you can also like wear, you know, a black top or a white top, and you kind of see that pop through. So yeah, this is kind of like a continuation of that story, through obviously the lens of the season, and also just looking at patterns through this lens of like deconstruction. Ultimately just trying to create different points of like expression through like familiar silhouettes. And then lastly, that kind of continued into this vest. So again, this is a vest we've done in previous seasons. In previous seasons, it's been reversible, if I guess anyone knows, and then it's also a bit bigger, so we kind of want to do a bit more of like a standard fit. The whole play here, again, through like deconstruction and trying to think about ways that we can make like a bit more of like an expressive uniform, is we looked at the elements of the vest and then we kind of like twisted it around. So here we have, it'd be like a V-neck, but we twisted the V-neck, and now the V-neck becomes like part of the sleeve, and then we keep like the other sleeve, and then we kind of, traditionally when we kind of played with this, like this would kind of be like a like more or less like a side seam if you were to kind of more or less like flip it. So then we kind of turn that into like a bit more like a boat neck. And then the body stays the same, and then similar to like our hoodies and other pieces, we have like this like slit, but a bit more like with an exaggerated hem. And yeah, just kind of like really great piece. I feel like this is something that obviously can be worn alone, but also can be used with, or can be layered with other things. Our tie shirt, or even just kind of like maybe our Henley. But yeah, so that's kind of like a continuation of the Argyle, I guess, fabrication in knitwear. So yeah, this is the last piece. Flat.